Hi, this is Dr. John Bergduff, and this is the second of 6 videos of a sequence that I'm preparing on numeration systems throughout history. In this series, we're exploring how people over time and all around the world develop different ways to represent numbers for purposes of counting and adding and subtracting and calculations and so forth. In the first video, we talked about the tally systems that were most likely used in the very early days of prehistory all over the world in one fashion or another that still persist in some usage even until now. In this video, we're going to talk about how the Egyptians took that basic tally system and made it more sophisticated to make it more usable to look at larger quantities. Now, when we talk about the Egyptians, you're thinking of the pyramids and all those wonderful things like that. The system that I'm going to show you, though, actually comes from pretty early in Egyptian history. What I'm going to show you was developed around 3400 BC, which is before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, and all the things that we think of with Egypt. This little vase over here on the left dates from that period, and you can see by looking at it that we're not as sophisticated as we're going to be in Egyptian history. This is what the Egyptian area looked like at about the time we're discussing. And if you can see, as you can see, we're really just talking about a gathering of tribes kind of in this middle area of the Nile. We don't have development all the way down to the Mediterranean. We don't have development farther up the Nile. But smaller groups are beginning to coalesce into larger and larger chieftaincies, as they call them. And this represented isolated communities sort of evolving into towns of maybe 5,000 people. So we're before the great empire, but leading up to it. So what did these Egyptians do with the tally system that we talked about last time? Well, for very small numbers, what the Egyptians were using was basically a tally system. So if you were counting, you would simply write, much like we saw before, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, they didn't have the idea of drawing a diagonal to create little groups of 5. So as you count on from here, you would go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and you think, well, this is really nothing new at all. Here's where it gets a little bit different. When you're looking at a larger number of things and you reach the point of having 10 of them, instead of writing another tally mark, instead of doing that, you use a different symbol. They used this symbol to represent 10. And what that's supposed to look like is like a yoke, like you would put on an ox if you wanted to hook it up to a plow. So if you needed to have a number like, let's say 26, what you would do is you'd say 10 twice, so kind of using those like a tally, but by having 2 of them, that represents 20, and then 6 more, you would use the standard tallies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That would be 26. And as the need for larger and larger communities developed, now beginning to get into the more sophisticated history of the empire, and you begin to look at numbers that needed to be in hundreds and thousands and so forth, new symbols were added to represent larger and larger quantities. And so you begin to get some pretty sophisticated hieroglyphics like you would see in an ancient tomb and so forth. In fact, here are some of the symbols that were developed to represent different kinds of numbers. The tally that we represented 1, they referred to that as a staff, like a shepherd would carry a staff. The yoke represents 10. This symbol is called a scroll, and it represents 100. This little drawing right here is supposed to represent a lotus flower, and that represents 1,000. This is a pointing finger, and that represents 10,000. And this is a tadpole, or maybe a fish, or I've even heard it called a pollywog, and that represents 100,000. And I think my personal favorite is the symbol for 1,000,000, which is an astonished man. I guess he won the lottery and he's pretty astonished. So how does this work? Well, here, in fact, I've repeated the different symbols just so we have them handy, just a little smaller. Here is an Egyptian numeral, as you might see on a wall somewhere. Let's interpret what it means. Well, as you can see, you've got 3 of the tadpoles, so that would represent 300,000. 300,000. Then you've got a couple of the pointing fingers. Those are 10,000 each, but you've got 2 of them, so that's 20,000. And 1 lotus flower, so that's 1,000. So far what we have is 321,000. And then you've got some scrolls. We count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would be 500. And then some yolks, 1, 2, 3, 4, that represents 40, 540, and finally 3 staffs or tally marks. This number represents 321,543. It's a lot of symbols to represent that number. It is, however, very artistic looking, and a whole lot better than 321,543 individual tally marks. That would have been pretty outlandish. Let's do one where we go the other way. Here is a number written in modern form. How would we write that in Egyptian numerals? Well, again, we just take a look at the different symbols that are available and recreate them as needed. So we begin in the millions place. We have 2 million. Millions are astonished men, so we would draw 2 astonished men. And that represents our 2 million, like that. There are no 100,000s, so we won't have any tadpoles in this one. But 20,000, our 10,000s are the pointing fingers, so we would need a couple of those. So here's a pointy finger, here's a pointy finger. You can kind of see, you can have a little bit of stylistic variation there. 3,000. So the 3,000 is the lotus flower. I'll need to draw 3 lotus flowers. That's basically a triangle, an arc, another triangle, and a little line like that. Got 3 of these, so there's 1, 2, 3. So that's the 3,000. And then we go to 300, so that's 3 scrolls. 1, 2, 3. 60s, that'd be 6 yolks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then finally the 4 ones, and that would be 4 staffs. That would be 2,023,364 in Egyptian numerals. Here's one. If you would like to try one for yourself, this is what I'm going to do. Here's a number in modern form, 352,607. If you would like to practice this on your own, I'm going to break briefly, hit the pause button on your device, try this for yourself, and in just a few seconds, I'll come back and write it out what I think it is. Okay, we're back. Let's see what we have. So we begin with 100,000s. Those are going to be tadpoles. So that takes a little bit of practice to draw. It does kind of look more like a fish than a tadpole to me, but we'll draw it like that. I'm almost seeing like the little Goldfish crackers is kind of what I'm seeing. You might vary this a little bit. The symbol for fish that you sometimes see in Christian iconography, you could use that instead and kind of get the idea of a fish. I'm going to kind of make it look a little bit more like the tadpoles we're used to seeing, though, here. So there's another one. That's the 300,000. Now we need some 10,000s. There's 50,000. That's 5 pointing fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's my pointing fingers. I don't like that last one very much. Looks a little fat. So let's try that one again. Well, hold on. Oh, give me a second here. My apologies, brief technical difficulty. Oh. All right, there we go. 350,000. Then we need to look. Then we need to look at the single thousands. That's 2,000. That'd be 2 lotus flowers. Like that. That's the 2,000. Then for the 600, we would need 6 of the scrolls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We would have no 10s, so no yolks, but finally 7 staffs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It takes up a lot of space. I wonder what it would have been like to be a student in school in ancient Egypt and learning to do mathematics with these different symbols. What if, for example, you wanted to learn about how to do addition? Here are 2 Egyptian numerals, and we're going to talk about adding them. Now, one way we could do this, of course, would be we could convert them to modern format and then add them and then rewrite them in Egyptian form. But the Egyptians would have thought in Egyptian. So let's kind of think about that in their point of view. These are fairly small numbers. I only see staffs, yolks, and scrolls, so this is hundreds, tens, and ones. Let's say, similar to the way we would add in our modern system, we focus first on the ones. I notice here that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 staffs in that number, 4 staffs in that number. So if I put those together, that would create 11 staffs. But as soon as you hit 10 of something, you use a yoke instead. So as I would add these together, I would have a yoke and 1 staff. I'm just going to make a little yoke symbol over here to the side to remind myself I've created a new yoke. Now let's look at adding up the yolks. If we count these, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yolks. And over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more yolks. But remember, we created a yoke when we added the staffs, so that's a total of 11 yolks. Well, I can leave 1, but 10 yolks would combine to make a scroll. So I would have an extra scroll. The 10 tens would make 100, and so that would be a scroll. So then you can add the scrolls, and I see 2 of them here, and 1 more over here, plus the one we just created. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 scrolls. So kind of writing backwards, we'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's what that would look like in Egyptian numerals. That might almost give you the idea of place value, in the sense that we've got some 1s and some 10s and some 100s. This is not really a place value system, however, because in place value, what you do is you use the same symbols in each place. So, for example, we use the number 3, and if it's in the 1's place, it represents a 3, but if we put it in the 10's place, it represents 30. So you don't really have a place value system until you're using a limited number of symbols and their location in the number tells you something about groups. We will see that in future systems. So this Egyptian system persisted through the entire imperial history, the entire history of pharaohs and pyramids and so forth, and was used all the way up until the time that Egypt was overrun by the Roman Empire, which was right around 30 BC. At that point, we discover that the Romans have been working on a system of their own that came along a little bit later, and that became the dominant system of not only the Roman Empire, but most of Europe for a good millennium after the Egyptians fell. So we will see the Romans next time. Thank you for joining me.